On July 13, Russian drones and missiles struck western Ukraine. Lviv and Chernivtsi were hit. Civilian shelters collapsed. Thousands fled into the dark, but none of the targets were military. The strikes followed evacuation routes, as if someone had access to Ukraine's inner workings. This attack showed that nowhere is safe. If these drones used civilian satellite networks, then no critical system in Europe is truly secure. But the real threat isn't just physical, it's digital. The same network that guides ambulances and air traffic has just guided an act of war. How this exposed a hidden war for control of information and why the next battlefield may already be inside your phone is what you're about to see. On the morning of July 13th, Ukrainian air defense units stationed in the west were operating under a fragile calm. Cities like Lviv and Chernivtsi, far from the eastern front lines, had become logistical and humanitarian hubs, places thought to be safe. Their early warning systems, radar grids, and anti-missile batteries were calibrated for mid-range threats. Coverage in the region was limited, as most resources remained concentrated near the Donbass line. This western corridor functioned as a lifeline, moving supplies, fuel, and civilians, critical arteries in Ukraine's war effort. But just after midnight, that illusion shattered. Dozens of Russian drones and cruise missiles, launched in synchronized waves, slammed into infrastructure deep in western territory. Power plants were struck. Railway nodes were disabled. One missile detonated near a refugee center. This wasn't just another bombardment. But unlike prior attacks focused on the east and south, this offensive cut into areas long considered rear-line sanctuaries. It was precise, coordinated, and deliberately aimed at collapsing the support network behind the front. Therefore, chaos erupted. Civilians panicked. Logistics stalled. The psychological blow rippled through Ukrainian command. What had been safe was no longer safe. Yet what few realized then was this assault was just phase one of a far broader Russian strategy to encircle Ukraine from within. This left Kyiv cornered, but the only move left was the very reaction Moscow had anticipated and prepared for. Kyiv didn't hesitate. The first reaction came within hours. Ukrainian forces scrambled to reinforce air defenses around critical cities and shelters. Mobile units were deployed. Radar coverage was extended. The goal was simple: stop the bleeding. They took older Soviet-era systems and paired them with fast-deployed NATO tech, including shoulder-launched interceptors and short-range jamming towers. The new setup worked by tracking incoming threats and firing quickly before impact. The text doesn't contain any numeric expressions, but instead, they were tracking how often Kyiv needed to reload and where new systems were being rushed in, turning defense into a new kind of vulnerability. Therefore, the very act of defending civilians drew a target on the backup systems. Russian strikes began zeroing in on the new mobile launchers and energy hubs. Few saw it then, but that first victory had baited Ukraine into revealing their soft underbelly. Kyiv believed it had responded with strength, but they were about to learn that their counterstrike had opened the door to a deeper trap. The trap closed when Moscow shifted its strategy, not targeting Ukraine's new weapons, but the fragile lifeline behind them, foreign support. And they didn't do it alone. Russia brought in North Korea, not just with words, but boots and engineers. While Russian drones darkened Ukrainian skies, Pyongyang offered manpower, missile specialists, and equipment maintenance crews. It wasn't an open invasion. It was reinforcement, wrapped in secrecy and speed. Their aim? Make Russia's offensive self-sustaining while slowly choking Ukraine's need-based strategy. But the impact was brutal. Ukraine's defensive workaround, dependent on international supply chains and shared intelligence, was now exposed. With North Korean engineers shoring up Russian logistics, Moscow no longer needed to pause and reload. Kyiv's advantage was flipped on its head. What made this moment a true crisis wasn't the battlefield losses, but the cracks that began forming between Ukraine and its key allies. Intelligence agencies hesitated. Military planners argued. No one knew how far North Korea's involvement stretched, or whether China was watching, perhaps even encouraging it from the shadows. Therefore, mistrust seeped in. NATO briefings grew tense. Leaks surfaced, suggesting Poland was demanding more aggressive retaliation, while Germany quietly pushed for back-channel diplomacy. For the first time, Ukraine wasn't just fighting Russia, it was navigating a split inside its own support circle. The alliance was fractured, the defense line was compromised, but the worst was still to come. With Ukraine's defenses strained and its alliances under pressure, Russia launched its most dangerous move yet, an operation that brought Europe to the edge of catastrophe. A fire broke out near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, the largest in Europe, during an intense wave of shelling. This wasn't a random strike. They combined sustained artillery barrages with drone reconnaissance, deliberately targeting the area around the plant. Conflicting reports were sent to Ukrainian allies. Some claimed it was an accident, others a false flag, creating total paralysis in response coordination. But the outcome was worse than anyone imagined. While the fire didn't breach the core, it came dangerously close to storage zones. Ukraine lost its most sensitive early warning equipment in the region, and even worse, it lost the confidence of key European partners who feared nuclear fallout more than escalation. This was no longer war, it was collapse. But in the fog of panic, something strange was missed: a consistent delay in the Russian drone response. Logs showed lags between target confirmation and strike, a sign of something deeper. The situation appeared hopeless. International watchdogs sounded the alarm. Diplomats scrambled to contain the panic. It looked like the enemy had already won. What reports didn't show was that in launching this highly complex operation, Russia had relied on a single encrypted satellite channel, believing it couldn't be traced. Everything seemed lost, but a single unnoticed detail was about to change everything. The turning point came from where no one was looking, not Ukraine's allies, nor its enemies. Deep inside Kyiv, the Ukrainian Security Service, SBU, quietly arrested a small group of Russian operatives. They weren't just spies. They were part of an assassination unit with orders to take out high-level targets and disrupt Ukraine's internal command. During interrogation, analysts uncovered a flaw in the Russian communication system. While messages remained encrypted, the devices used by the agents revealed something far more critical: metadata showing exactly where and when messages were sent and received. Ukraine couldn't read the conversations, but they could trace the lines of communication. But this wasn't just a technical slip, it was a window into the enemy's core. Within days, the Ukrainian intelligence community had reconstructed large parts of Russia's command and control architecture. They saw the chain of orders. They saw which units moved when and who pulled the strings. They didn't have the enemy's codes, but they had the blueprint of the enemy's entire operation. What had begun as damage control now became something else entirely: a plan to dismantle the Russian network from within. Therefore, Ukraine's new weapon wasn't a missile or drone. It was raw, actionable intelligence. And buried in that data was a revelation no one expected. Russia was preparing a second wave of sabotage, not on the battlefield, but inside Europe itself. With the enemy's network exposed and its next move revealed, Ukraine had something it hadn't had in weeks: control. It was time to turn the trap around. After discovering the enemy's weakness, Ukraine and its allies met behind closed doors. This time, the goal wasn't to defend, it was to strike back first. They launched what they called Operation Feedback Loop. The idea was bold: use the Russian command network against itself. By sending false signals and feeding the system bad data, they hoped to mislead Russian forces into launching attacks in the wrong places. But the risk was huge. If Russia realized the network was compromised, they'd shut it down instantly. And if that happened, Ukraine would lose the one tool that had shifted the war in their favor. Until now, Ukraine had been reacting to each move. But now, they were in control, setting traps and shaping the enemy's decisions in advance. Therefore, they built a massive deception campaign. What looked like confusion and disorder across Ukraine was actually a careful performance. Everything was meant to keep Russia confident and blind. The bait was set. The enemy was sure they still held the upper hand. But that overconfidence would soon become their greatest mistake. The final confrontation began when Russia launched its long-planned strike, aiming to hit what they believed were Ukraine's most vulnerable targets. But every move was based on false data. Missiles hit empty fields. Troops were deployed to locations that had already been cleared. Financial transfers meant to support the offensive were redirected into monitored accounts controlled by Ukraine and its partners. But this wasn't just a failed attack, it broke their entire system. Once Russian generals realized what had happened, they shut down their own network to stop further damage. Suddenly, they were blind, disconnected, and scrambling. Victory didn't come with explosions or cheering, but with silence, the kind that follows when an entire command system goes dark. Still, that silence didn't mean peace. It meant something new, and possibly more dangerous, was coming. Therefore, Russia wasn't destroyed, but it was forced to pull back and reorganize. Ukraine had survived the storm, yet no one knows how long it will take for the enemy to rebuild or what their next move will look like. The tide had turned. Ukraine held the advantage, but holding this new power raises a terrifying new question. How far are they willing to go now? The war didn't end, it just changed. Now it's not about soldiers and tanks, but about information and control. The line between defense and attack is almost gone. Ukraine, after defending itself, now has the power to launch the same kind of attacks it once feared. This victory created a new risk. One wrong move could start something even bigger. People in places like Washington and Brussels are no longer asking, how do we win? But instead, what are the rules in a war where computer code is the main weapon? Today's war isn't led by someone holding a gun. It's led by someone sitting at a computer, someone who can shut down a country with a few clicks. And now the real question is, who's watching that person?